So to have impossible standards to live up to is actually not fair in a sense, because everyone psychologically, physically are not the same. They're not. But some stiff in a tie has created a society with rules and regulations and a certain moral ethics that we're all supposed to live up to based on their opinion of how it should be. But they weren't thinking about the guy in Fortitude Valley in Brisbane, for example, who's doing it tough. Or they weren't thinking about the homeless people in Los Angeles. They didn't have these people in mind.
More we have rules and regulations, I think we more get to abandon the people who are different.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
And that is to say that how much society or government in general don't trust people, don't trust their own people in their country, right?
Yeah.
Therefore, this endless cycle keeps going on. More rules and regulations, right? And they change the rules and regulations every time.
Yeah.
And you don't know what to follow. And you need to research for yourself. But then there's tons of different things to look at, and all the languages that our lawyers would use, we have no idea, right? And more rules and regulations there are, more we don't trust people, more we don't trust government and society.
Yep.
And that's actually that story that Confucius and Lao Tzu's conversation. They call, the Zhuangzi wrote this.
Yeah,
right?
of course. Yeah.
Imaginary
Dialogue. Yeah.
Yes. And then Confucius come up to Lao Tzu talking about charity. He wanted to discuss about the charity. It's just, charity is such a good idea to help one another, and we help people who are in a poor situation and they need help, and and who are lacking a lot of things, and we can go and help out these people, make their situation better and whatnot. But then Lao Tzu just scoffed at him. What charity are you talking about? Yeah.
Exactly.
When it needs to rain, it rains. When the sun needs to come up, sun will come up. And so the nature, the world itself is just functioning just fine.
Yeah.
Right? So that's to show the Confucius that how much he himself in that dialogue thought that is a right thing to be doing.
Yeah.
And that's over a sense of control, right?
Yeah, it is control.
And the control is based on not trusting.
Yes.
Yeah.
And one of Lao Tzu's points is that in Confucius creating all of this rules and regulations and so forth and so on, that's why there's a need for charity and duty and universal love. And Lao Tzu saying, if you had never created any of this, you idiot, then we wouldn't have to be talking about charity and duty and so forth and so on. Because, like you said, the sun comes up in the morning, the stars, they're doing the same thing every day. What makes human beings special? Why should human beings have to control nature and control each other? That's one of the main points of Daoism, right?
And one side effect with the charity is that because people they do good work, charity work, but that gives you a certain sense of identity that they are doing good things. I'm a good person.
Yeah, it's moral based.
Yeah, and they act out of that place and they judge themselves from that place, which is a little bit cringe.
Yeah,
for
a bit
me.
cringy,
Yeah. Whereas you would help other people because that's what people do.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Well, that would be completely Lao Tzu's perspective, right? Charity, without think of that charity.
Yeah. You just do it.
Because that is just right thing to be doing.
Yeah.
It's not something that you need to label it as that's a good thing. You are doing good deed.
Because people are trying to be pious, see? They're trying to live up to a standard of being virtuous. You know, like in especially spiritual paths like Christianity, Confucianism, so forth and so on. They create these standards. And that's when then you get, like you said, the cringy people who are on Instagram giving food to a beggar. Like, look at me, look what I'm doing. It's virtue signaling. It's not from the heart.
Yeah.
It's not from the heart. And Lao Tzu's like, you don't need rules and that to help each other. Actually, the rules and that keep you actually more separate from each other. The morality keeps you more separate. You see, because like you said, you're creating an identity, you're creating self-interest, you're creating separation between one another.
It naturally abandons people who, let's say, don't participate in charity.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Like, they're not doing good deed, they don't have good heart.
They don't have a good
Like, no, it's not.
No, it's not.
Yeah, that's not the way.
There's just people are in different circumstances.
Yeah.
You need to see it that way. People are in different circumstances and have different life situations. That's it.
Yeah.
There's nothing more to look at. But again, you raise a good point, because you're creating a separation between those who support charity and those who don't, as if the ones who don't are bad. And that's not true. Like you said, there's a large portion of people who do support charities who are just virtue signaling. Look at most of the billionaires and this and that. They don't really have a vested interest. It is great that they do contribute money and this and that, but they're kind of like ticking boxes.
Yeah.
They don't go out there and get their hands dirty without the cameras.
That's right.
You know, you've worked at Mother House in Calcutta. How many selfless people go there without... This is pre-social media when you were working
Exactly.
there.
Yeah.
You're not there going...
I had no phone, no mobile phone.
So you're doing it because that's what is needed. That's what just has to be done. That's what Lao Tzu's point is. Like, if you see someone on the side of the road and they're a bit hungry, and you have a... Say if you have a chocolate pie, you just, here you go, man, I don't need it, I just had lunch. That's it, and you just keep going. Or if you have a chat or something, I don't know. But there's nothing more to think about.
Yeah.
See, there's not a standard of morality that you need to live up to. You're in sync with nature. You know, you see animals acting that way, right? You see one animal that may not have food or so forth and so on, and then there's situations where another animal will come over and give it some food because it's not as maybe physically built and it can't protect itself as much. But there is that intrinsic li within everything that knows that that animal needs something as well. You know, just give them a little bit of dog meat or whatever. And it's not to say that there isn't competition in nature. Of course there is. But there is that as well. There is that fundamental goodness there. And the problem with the human mind is we've taken that fundamental goodness and we've put that up on a pedestal.
Yeah.
And anything that falls out of a line with that, we say is evil and bad, and we condemn it. And then you set up a standard. A standard. And we can't live up. Standards and labels are not natural. I know that you and I harp on about this within the podcast all the time, but if you're following, especially Daoism, you can't follow standards and labels. And you also can't be a moralistic person if you're going to follow Daoism. Because the Taoist sage is not touched by the drama of the world.
Yeah.
They follow the way. But it doesn't mean they're not generous and they don't care.
Yeah.
They know that if they contribute to this artificial illusion of partiality, that's only going to contribute to more conflict and down the line. In some sense, your actions, especially in that regard, have such a significant effect because you're kind of contributing to the drama, right? You're adding fuel to the fire, and we don't need no more fuel on the fire. Taoism's not really well understood because the way China kind of went with Maoism and with communism, the fundamental principles and understanding and the deeper meaning of Taoism was kind of lost. You know, so the understandings of the Zhuangzi text and the Tao Te Ching were kind of then overlaid into certain moral ethics and were kind of brought in line with, in some sense, with Buddhist ideas and that as well. But even though that there may be Buddhist elements within certain elements of Taoism, they are still two opposed parts in some sense, especially when we talk about morality. You know, because the way, the Tao, is about just following the way of nature. You don't have to be vegetarian. You don't have to do anything. You have to understand the way. You have to come into alignment with the way of the universe. And that's a path of letting go, and also letting go of morality, letting go of your sense of self. And if that means that you're going to take up a job in a soup kitchen, that is what the Tao will determine for you. You will be in a situation that you'll end up in a soup kitchen working for the homeless people. And that's all good.
Yeah.
But don't start to associate that with being pious and that you're more moral than a guy in a pub on a Friday night getting smashed. That's the difference, right? Like Lao Tzu would say, we still need the guy in the pub getting smashed. That's just nature. That's always going to be that way. Don't try to change it. See, the problems happen when you try to change it. People get annoyed when you're trying to change the way they are. We mentioned homosexuals earlier, they get annoyed when you're trying to impose them. No, you should be heterosexual. It's like, they're not heterosexual, man. Let's leave them alone. Let's let them live their life.
Yeah.
And that's Lao Tzu's point. Instantly, when you're trying to interfere with life, you're causing conflict.
Government is chaos, and in fact, nature, what is beyond government, is order. And this becomes evident when we study the nature of Daoism, or the thing called the Tao, the thing or the way. That's what it represents. The Tao stands for the way, and you can say it's the way of nature, as many people will also reference. It is a beautiful philosophy in my eyes because it allows the world to manifest itself. In the same way an individual might fast in the body, for example, to help the body self-regenerate, self-heal, we can look at the world and see, wow, there's a world full of problems, full of chaos, and people, doing all sorts of bad things to each other. How do we heal that? Perhaps it's best if we just leave things alone. Even though a lot of people would say, well, no, we need a new law, we need a new politician, we need to create an action. But perhaps instead of creating an action, we create inaction, meaning no action. We let ourselves be with the natural world. And this is what it means to practice Daoism, which is a understanding that is growing in the world. In fact, it's been growing for many thousands of years. It's long existed. And the governments of the world have tended to keep this knowledge also hidden from the public. It's not a mainstream religion, much like deism, much like animism, or some people might say paganism. These other forms of philosophy don't often enter the equation when people talk about religion or politics or culture, yet so much beauty could be found in them when an individual deeply understands these. So Daoism and the way of nature, if you just do a quick web search on this, they will say government is unnatural, which is in line with my recent work. If you haven't checked it out, I created a 4-part documentary series talking about number 1, the natural, number 2, government, 3, anarchy, and 4, moral suasion, where I break down in detail what it means for something to be considered natural and why government is actually unnatural. And on the moral suasion mini documentary part, I mentioned some parts about Daoism. This is very important. So in this video, I'm going to delve deep into what it means so you can practice it within your own life, not just when it comes to politics, but realize that this is a worldview that can help the whole world in many ways. From an article titled Natural Government Born of Tao, they even mention that there is no such thing as anarchy, and this aligns perfectly with what Larkin Rose says in his Most Dangerous Superstition book, that anarchy is just reality, and also what Jeremy Locke in his book The End of All Evil says, there's no such thing as anarchy. You're going to see this as a common theme because there is no such thing as anarchy if anarchy is just reality and it's just nature. People assume it's some sort of political ideology, but if you were just letting life be life and letting things be, you're not creating a government, so what are you creating? Well, you're creating the Tao, but you're not creating the Tao, you're allowing the Tao, you're living with the Tao. And so this is what it means. From this article, it says any external form of governance, control, force, or a search for power actually puts one out of sync with the natural harmony of the universe. As a result, we feel as if we do not belong here. To govern is to control, and control is built from the experiences of the past and a plan for the future. Nature in all its glory is locked out, which is why a different system of government cannot be the way out for us. If we can be sincere in living Wu Wei, we will allow the course of Tao to run its path back into harmony through our own non-action in regard to the dilemma at hand. Okay, now if you don't know what Wu Wei stands for, it stands for the effortless. It stands for the embrace, or listening, may you say. Right? The same way a health coach might listen to a client of theirs because they realize they can't help the client unless they truly understand the client's condition, and that requires asking questions, and the client can learn for themselves, and everybody's learning together. That's why a coach is supportive, because they're listening. They're not saying this is what you have to do with your health, here's a list of things you have to avoid. They're actually working with the person, finding out what is it that they actually want themselves. Okay, and Wu Wei is often associated with the concept of Ziran, which we're going to mention soon. It mentions that revolutions and protests do not change anything because they are still reacting out of human conditioning and seeking to control life. To govern is to control is to destroy life, and this is what needs to be reversed through the way of nature and Wu Wei. Again, the effortless. Human beings have the intelligence to comprehend the nature of Wu Wei, yet many people do not have the knowledge of Wu Wei naturally. This aligns well with understanding Socrates and what he said, that knowledge is the only good, ignorance is the only evil. In my philosophy, I call naturosophy the philosophy of nature. It's the same premises. If you have knowledge, that is what allows you to connect with nature in the very first place. Otherwise, you don't really have a concept of nature or saying anything is natural. And this article mentions that, we claim to be the most intelligent species on this planet, but is that really the case? I mean, if we look out in nature, these animals are living according to the natural systems that be. They wake up with the sun, they go to sleep with the sun. I certainly don't always follow that, but to realize that that is the natural rhythms. If you're sick, you have to rest. If you're thirsty, you need to drink water. These animals are in tune with their bodies. Now it's like, oh, well, I have a job, I can't do this. Oh, I have to follow orders, I can't think for myself. We are going against our own nature when we do these things that we know we shouldn't do. And sometimes we don't know we shouldn't do it, or we don't know better. We want to remain ignorant. Okay, so then this article mentions to seek refuge from those unnatural systems, we need to understand nature itself. The organic pattern of the individual is our innate nature driven by T, or virtue. Okay, nature then has no relationship to force, control, or power. This is mentioning basically the important role of morality, why morality exists. If you're going to say legality is what is in control of this world and is what's going to create all the order in the world, then where's the place for morality? When do people teach morality? If you're saying we need legality, we need authority, then are we teaching that, or are we teaching morality? Because if I look into school systems today, they're teaching authority. They're not teaching morality. They're teaching authority as morality. That is their source of morality. You have to follow orders, stay in line, do what you're told, repetitive rote learning. It's not critical thinking or really saying, okay, think for yourself, encourage your own creativity, find it for yourself, right? So this is all coming back to fruition. People find this within themselves. They find a purpose over time by asking questions like this. Now, the article mentions the order and pattern of nature is not a forced order, as nature is not bound by external influence or control. The Taoist term for nature is the Chinese Jian, or Zuran, right? Which means that which is spontaneously of itself. When a natural organism is in harmony with all life, it grows of itself spontaneously. Suzan can only arise of itself without external compulsion. Okay, now this requires some understanding of how life works, and when people read the Tao Te Ching, which is one of the founding documents that people will consider for Daoism, they start to see, wow, there's polarities all over nature, and this allows us to understand so much more. This is why Daoism has this symbol, the yin-yang, to represent both the masculine and the feminine, the dark and the light, to realize that there is value in the bad, and just as much as there's value in the good, because they lead to each other, at least they teach us about one another, and everything exists for a reason. It's a matter of embracing that so we can understand it and live with it, rather than going against it, saying, oh, I'm in denial of reality and I can't live with the bad people. We have to make a law. No, perhaps there is a way you can deal with bad people, and maybe it's not through just throwing them in a cage. Maybe throwing them in a cage is not the best way to handle criminals or people doing bad things, because they're not criminals, they're not a diabetic, they're people with bad experiences and bad mentalities that make them out to do further bad things, and we can understand that if we put ourselves in their shoes. But oftentimes people want to condemn others and say, oh, they're psychopaths, oh, they're bad people, but always pointing the finger externally. And here we focus on ourselves, because that's the number one thing we can focus on. Okay, so Ran, it says it's that which is spontaneously of itself. I also call it self-regulating. Some people will call it the natural intelligence, okay, or just the natural. And so if you combine the Wu Wei with the Zuran, what you have is the effortless working for the self-regulating, or the listening working for the intelligence. Because you can't learn from the world or the intelligence of the universe without first opening your heart and mind to it. You can't breathe long and really stay relaxed and open and aware if you're not taking the time to do so and letting things flow and letting things go. Okay, so this is why I made a slide dedicated to the Wu Wei and Ziran in my Naturosophy seminar, where I mentioned you can choose to embrace nature. It's easy as it is. It's easy as it is as you let it be, as you let yourself be. You live your life and you let others live their lives. This is the common credo, live and let live, do no harm. And to stop changing life and start living life. And this is why, some people may not truly feel happy when they're trying to change everything else around them and point the fingers and create blame and guilt and burdens and all this stuff. Attachments, expectations, judgments, and they hold on to these. They tend to destroy the character or the underlying moral, higher philosophical understandings of this world. And this is why I think it's such a beautiful thing to study ourselves and our world, looking at it through this lens, okay? And then again, not just limiting it to this lens, right? Because there's so many different philosophies of nature. Everything came out of nature. The question is, well, how far is it from nature? And just because something can be created does not mean it needs to exist. This is why I say just because something is natural to occur does not mean it's natural to exist. And just because something is natural to exist does not mean it's natural to use. There's a poisonous plant in nature. Oh, I don't have to touch the plant because I know it's not going to benefit me. And why should I touch it? I could probably leave it alone, right? It's not something I need to survive. And getting clear on our needs is very important, because people say, I need my phone, I need technology, I need social media. Do you really need those things? People assume they need things in today's world, but do they actually need it? They say they do, right? And they condition themselves into saying they need it. In the case of government, it's a very clear example. People say they need a government, they need it for order, as if society will never operate on its own. People would never voluntarily come together. But they assume, they don't actually know. And that is the key. That's why in our ignorance we can give way to evil if we don't actually know. We assume. Alright? And this is why I go over psychological experiments and everything on my channel, because it's important to know. Now, this article says when we withdraw from our conditioned perception of reality, we come back into nature and grow spontaneously in harmony with all other components of life. What would happen if we let go of control? When we leave the animal, plant, and mineral kingdoms alone, they continue to grow and prosper without any interference. What would happen then if we left people alone? From the perspective of traditional Taoism, if we left people alone to follow their own passions and interests, as they would to live their own life, I don't live your life, right? You don't live my life. That's just self-ownership, and that's literally the opposite of slavery. I don't think there shouldn't be any slavery in society. This is evolution. This is respecting our fellow man. This is consciousness. It says harmony would prevail within community, no matter how large or small. Okay, people say, oh, well, there's too many people in the world, that's why we need a government. Oh, there's too many bad people in the world, that's why we need government. They make these assumptions, they throw them out there. They don't actually know what they're saying. If there were no interference from the external world, people would follow their natures, because passive obedience would no longer be a way of life. People wouldn't just be following orders, they would be following themselves. What they were given by nature, not some piece of paper that they were given by another man or a government that was created and assumed that they were born into. That's all man imposing upon man. That's not something nature provided. So for all those people saying, oh, I care about nature, are you looking at this? Right? It says we would no longer feel the need to obey unnatural organizational patterns, because in following our own nature, we would begin to harmonize with other people and the environment. When we leave life alone, Tao runs its natural course and all aspects of life come into order without seeking order. Because we recognize there's a natural order without that artificial man-made order. Same way we might look at natural law and say natural law is above man's law. It's what has always been there, and that is actually what we have to embrace and follow. And to violate natural law is really just to ignore it, right? And say, oh, well, we can just ignore it and do our own thing. There's no such thing as violating it except ignoring, because ignorance is the only evil. Every form of evil is a form of ignorance. It's like you either know that it's evil and yet you do it anyway, so you ignore the fact that you know, or you don't know that it's evil, period, and therefore you're still ignorant. You don't have the knowledge. Right? So it's very important to have that knowledge. And there was a researcher, an anarchist in the 1900s, which Derek Broze also studied and wrote a whole book on, called How to Opt Out of the Technocratic State. And his name was Kropotkin, okay? And he postulated that if we were to leave people alone to follow their own nature, a real social order and true government would emerge out of the current system. He created things like counter-economics, and nowadays you have the ANCAPs and the voluntarists, and all these different communities come together, realizing that people can come together, create different things, all without violence. I don't care what you title yourself. If you are a real anarchist, the word means no rulers, not no rules. It's because you don't want people being coerced against their will. You want non-aggression. Typically when you look at different anarchist factions, you see black in the flag, right? And usually they'll pair it with like gold or red or, I don't know, teal, pink. There's a billion colors people can pair with it, but typically the black stands for non-aggression. And the non-aggression principle is something that in libertarian philosophy is the idea that you do not do harm to another. You do not cause, a breach upon an individual's property. So it's a very simple understanding, and most people live by it in their day-to-day lives. They just create an exception for that in politics. Okay, it says his system is almost a carbon copy of the Taoist Suzanne. Its depth is equal to the thought of a sage. Yet his political theory was called anarchism. Okay, so that many people could conveniently put a superficial context and believe they understood it. This is the problem with labeling or attaching ourselves to ideologies. I don't say I'm an anarchist or an abolitionist often at times. I will just say I'm a fellow human being. I'm just like you. We're all just people. And realizing that we're all just people means that there can't be any government, because we assume this person has this authority, they have this badge, this uniform, they can perform actions that other people can't, they have more rights than other people. That's inequality, and it's creating man-made rights and man-made law. But yet, if we were to embrace reality, embrace nature, guess what? There's none of that. In fact, there's a lot less confusion because we're all just treating each other as we are intended to treat each other. And this is why anarchy is rather just nature, and therefore there really isn't any anarchy. Now, this text also mentions in the classical Taoist texts left behind by Zheng Zhu, known simply as Chuangzi, he profoundly articulates this teaching. Quote, "I have heard of letting the world be, of leaving it alone. I have never heard of governing the world. You let it be for fear of corrupting the inborn nature of the world." Indeed, just a side note, add to this, is the gentleness of life. People realize when they get in a car accident or something bad happens, how gentle life is and how much they have to take care of what is going on in this life. And yet we take that for granted. We think, well, we could just rule over everybody else's life and all the businesses and all the lands and all the people, tell them how to live their life because we need it. And we assume that basically nature is imperfect without man's creation. And so we do this, not realizing that by doing this, we're corrupting this inborn nature, as he's saying, and this gentleness of nature, which we have to tread very carefully around, because if we don't respect it, look what happens. Democide, the #1 cause of unnatural death. Look at World War II. It's not so long ago. Millions and millions of deaths, and people just think, oh, it's because of one corrupt leader. No, it's because of the millions of people who put that one person in power because they believed that that person was an authority figure, that person had the right to rule, that that person could change reality, that that person could be nature, that we can change nature and alter it however we wish. It's all the same mindset here. And so you leave it alone for fear of distracting the virtue of the world, okay? Fear of distracting the virtue of the world. We want to focus on morality. We don't want legality to take over. If the nature of the world is not corrupted, if the virtue of the world is not distracted, why should there be any governing of the world? Because virtue and morality, or truth itself, is authority, right? Why should anything else be authority other than truth or morality? This is my question to you. In going against our nature, Zan, we not only destroy ourselves, but we also contribute to the annihilation of the human race. The government we have created out of our insecurity and irresponsibility has to come to an end, or we as a species will succumb to the fate that all parasites experience. People will use the Bible and different books and religions to try to justify their worldview of justifying government. But yet, how often do people question their own belief system and their own morals, regardless of those texts, based on their own awareness, their own experience, how they treat people on a day-to-day basis? If somebody believes in taxation, maybe 10%, 1% of someone's income, okay, you think it's justified to steal someone's money. Would you do it yourself? Or do you have to hire some gang, have it written down, some fancy piece of paper that's believed to have some sort of authority with some people who have this fancy claim on other people's lives? Because if you're not going to do it yourself, that's kind of hypocritical, is it not? It's the same action. You're taking someone's money. Okay, you call it taxation, it's the same thing as theft. So what makes it different? I'm going to put some questions on the screen for you, because oftentimes it's hard for people to address their own mindset, and that's what we're battling here. If we created the system and it's all man-made and there's this natural system beyond it, then we need to understand ourselves. In the same way, if we want to abide to nature, and nature gave us this body, this life, we need to understand ourselves, our nature. If we have any hopes or care to align to nature itself, we need to understand our role, our place. Right? I call this time and place. Over time, we learn our place. And we have to. This is why nature always kicks us in the butt, and we end up in this endless cycle of democide, governments rising and falling, and people dying. I don't like to see it. It's a tough subject, and a lot of people are afraid of talking about it. Yet, this Taoist or Tao perspective is so beautiful that you don't have to fear, because you understand the natural rhythms of this earth. Right? It says, the big question we need to ask is, how do we take steps to sincerely trust others and let them live life as they choose? If we can leave people alone, then the world will naturally heal its wounds and begin to grow in harmony with the Tao. How is this not do no harm? How is this not, the non-aggression principle? The idea of just let people be, and if they do breach upon you, defend yourself. Or defend the person being breached upon, but you're not the one to throw the first punch. You're not the one initiating violence. You're preventing the violence. You're stopping the violence. You're not committing violence. You're not condoning violence. But every time somebody says, I want a law passed, how is that law going to be put into effect in society without violence? Because if people aren't obligated to obey that law, then it's just a recommendation. It's just a guideline. It's just a general rule for people to practice, and therefore it's kind of like morality, is it not? That's what differentiates legality versus morality. Morality, you don't have to obey by violence. It's something you learn and you teach, right? This is why it's very important to raise kids into this world understanding the knowledge. And so it says, but none of this is possible if we have not confirmed the reality of Zan within our own being, or the Tao, right? There's many ways to say this. It says, trust in people is real government. We can only leave people alone to live their own lives if we are sincere in our own introspection and willing to discard the conditioning that clouds our unity with our brothers and sisters. When we are sincerely humble and free from agendas, we nourish and secretly transform the world, again, through not seeking to transform it. Okay, so we are transforming the world without even having to transform it, because we're letting things be. A sage has no agenda, and the way you look at this is like a doctor who works with nature, who says, I'm going to let the body heal itself. I'm not going to impose upon the body, I'm actually just going to let it heal itself, and therefore, although your body is changing, I'm just going with the natural change that was already there, just working with it. And so he has no agenda, and this brings spiritual oxygen into the world. We all have undergone various sorts of conditioning, and we all have the same physical and emotional states, so we can sympathize with the rest of the world, which suffers as a result of the same hypnosis as ours, right? This is self-reflection. if we think certain things and other people think certain things, so the world will manifest our thoughts. This is the principle of mentalism, the Hermetic principle, and the principle of correspondence, as above, so below. If enough people understand this knowledge, or enough people do certain actions, so the world, reality, resultant condition will become the reflection of those individuals. Okay, so whether you're looking at the leaders or the people who are not the leaders, they're all reflections of one another. Whether you're looking at influencers, social media influencers, the social media, the different forms of products and services out there, everything is a reflection of the human mind and our thoughts and experiences. Okay, so on the other hand, if we are all inherently the same, we also possess the same qualities that a sage lives by. And that's a beautiful thing, is recognizing that we're unique in our own way, which is why, we can't be ruled by another or told how to live our own lives. In the same way, we're also all the same, and therefore no one person gets to rule over another person's life. And so no matter which way you look at it, there's just a beauty to be found in the imperfection and perfection in nature. It mentions too, Zen can only come to fruition when we trust that everything the universe has produced is fundamentally right and could be no other way. I mean, how could we go against nature? How could we go against what is the constitution, the order, the way of life? I mean, how could we do that? The systems of government, politics, banking, religion, and commerce are unnatural. That's not to say that there aren't going to be some religions that are practiced or some forms of economy that is practiced. It's to say that we recognize something higher, okay? The thing about politics is we don't need to practice any politics if it's just violence, and that's all it is. Like if we see politics and government as just adding violence into the equation, then it's not really helping us, right? But if we consider politics to rather be voluntary and people just coming together, helping each other out without violence, then okay, great. That's politics that will always exist. But we don't need slavery, and I think what proves that is the 1800s, the end of chattel slavery in America. In different parts of the world, people nowadays wouldn't even try it. And sure, there might be chattel slavery in different other parts of the world, but to see that society can function without it perfectly, when so many people said, no, we can't function without it, and we need violence, we need slavery, is showing that, wait, we can evolve as a human species. And the reason why people were slaves to begin with were because they were uneducated, because they weren't empowered. They weren't empowered to take control of their own life. Even though there were way more slaves than there were slave owners, they could easily take over the slave owner. They thought that they were meant to be slaves because they didn't have the knowledge to empower themselves. They didn't embrace the fact that nature gave them their own conscience, that nature gave them their own self-direction, that nature allows them to take control of their own life and do whatever they want with it, that they're not bound to the change of another man, right? Slavery is completely a man-made condition. And so they have gotten us to a certain point, and we have learned many lessons from them. But should we grow attached to these? It is just that they are no longer needed. The true government of the world will grow out of the sickness of the old to heal the world from its hypnosis. We do evolve as a human species. There might be certain cycles because we don't learn our lesson, like in the case of government, but we are generally evolving, like in, again, the case of ending slavery, but also the invent of natural rights and natural law and the American Declaration of Independence, and then to the French Declaration and to other parts of the world, right? People start to recognize, okay, we all are equal. That took thousands of years just to come to that conclusion. I mean, it sounds so simple, but why? It's because governments are based on violence, and when they say that we're equal, does that make it any better if they're still using violence? These are the questions we have to ask ourselves. And because of all the trickery, the idea of, oh, these people care about us, they know more than us, they're in the system, this system was built by people wiser than us, and the system was built by God even, or whatever, it all makes it seem like the system is justified, as if the violence that is used by law is justified and better than it ever was before, and therefore we should live with it. But if we realize, no, we have to keep improving as a human species, then a system 200, 300 years old cannot last. We need to move forward, and we need to realize that there's always something better to achieve if we want a moral, human, free species that's living in a voluntary world. Right? I mean, most people live by voluntary interaction within their day-to-day life, as I mentioned. Okay, if we cannot trust the world and the people in it, we stand no chance for survival because a species at war with itself is doomed. You, the individual, can begin the process, but it really depends on how sincere your trust is. People often say that they trust the universe, but then they consistently condemn life according to their conditioned perspectives. Again, in school, we're taught about authority. We're taught that government is necessary. If we are to assimilate Wu Wei, we need to be radical enough to let life go its own way. I mean, the abolitionists, the people who were ending chattel slavery, they were called radical for their views of just saying, wait, these people are just like human beings. How is that radical? I talk to people all the time now, and, I don't like politics. I don't like... It's a divisive game, and I don't like seeing all the division in the world. But there's people who will get mad at me, who will jump at me and attack me, even though all I'm saying is that I want to treat people like people and nothing else. I don't want my opinion imposed on others with violence, because that's what government does. I simply want people to recognize that very thing, and that has nothing to do with me benefiting me, giving me a paycheck, putting me in power. Has nothing to do with that, right? I want the best world for everybody. I want everyone to be free, not just one or few people. So it says this will allow us to be seeds of growth which will change the world without our intention to do so. With or without, if we're living with life, that's what matters here. We don't want to fit life into one box or fit people into different boxes. We want people to express themselves, live happy, healthy lives. And in order to do so, we need to help and guide each other. Yes, there's always going to be bad people, but why not have a world of so many solutions rather than a monopoly on one solution? Because only with a government do you have a monopoly on those solutions where there's only one post office. Oh my gosh, there's only one, police office, police station, and there's so many other abilities. Like, people can hire private defense if they want to. People can arm themselves if they want to, and if they don't, that's fine too. People can choose how to live their lives. They can be a pacifist, right, and choose not to have any help. They don't have to go to war. They're not, having to be enlisted by some people say, okay, you need to go to war and fight some people you barely know across the world. I mean, this is why the world is the way it is, because people believe that that is moral, legitimate, and natural, when it's literally just people telling other people how to live their own lives. Like, that's not natural. That's people wanting to be nature, rule over you, be God, and that's not healthy. That's an abusive relationship. So now I'm going to show you some clips from different videos online talking about Taoism and government, and I hope you enjoy it.
You can provide values, you can provide an escape for people who maybe want to turn inward, for piety, but you cannot challenge the government. You cannot be an alternative source of values to the government, or else the government will turn against you.
To looking for how to live. The non-political nature of Taoism is revealed in the Zhuangzi. From the Zhuangzi, when the sage governs, does he govern what is on the outside? He makes sure of himself first, and then he acts. The sage governs what is on the inside, his own thoughts, emotions, and perceptions. Zhuangzi articulates that it is not the world that the sage governs, but rather himself. Tian Ken was wandering the sunny side of Yin Mountain, where he reached the banks of the Liao River. He happened to meet a nameless man. He questioned the man, saying, "Please, may I ask how to rule the world?" The nameless man said, "Get away from me, you peasant. What kind of dreary question is that? I'm just about to set off with the Creator, and if I get bored with that, then I'll ride on the light and lissom bird out beyond the 6 directions, wandering in the village of not even anything, and living in the broad and borderless field. What business do you have with this talking of governing the world and disturbing my mind?" But Tian Ken repeated his question. The nameless man said, "Let your mind wander in simplicity. Blend your spirit with the vastness. Follow along with things the way they are, and make no room for personal views. Then the world will be governed." The nameless man did not offer any political philosophy, but rather a practical one. To make no room for personal views would be to lack all political thought. How to rule this world is not a question worth answering, for the nameless man doesn't offer any guidance to ruling, but rather an approach to life. Such is the way of Taoism.